He snuck in on me. He didn't really sneak in, but you're here. You're here. Hello. We are at the end of chapter 1, finally. How long has it been? 2 months? We talked about a whole lot of stuff, though, not just about chapter 1. So I think it's worth it. Spending a whole summer on we could have spent a whole summer on chapter 1. There's no question about it. We're going to talk about the Sabbath today because we're going to get into chapter 2. And that's its own fun. How carefully woven together both the chronicle, the creative acts, the narrative is woven together with its kind of theological significance, but significance for the people of God. It says something in general about humanity, about the created order and humanity, but it says something specific, and it contains within it a blueprint for obedience, a blueprint of obedience for the people of God, which we'll talk a little bit about today. That has been left behind a little bit in our world because there was a redemptive fork in the road where the Gentiles were included. So the Mosaic mandates, like Sabbath keeping, were left behind. But we'll see its relevance. We'll see if there's something relevant here. It's certainly relevant to understanding the history of redemption and what God was doing through this people. It's also important for understanding an awful lot of the conflict between Jesus and particularly the Pharisees when he was in Galilee. So we'll get back to all that. Let's go back and read the very last little bit here. We're going to talk about 2. So this is the formation of the man and the woman. Verse 26, let us make man, God says, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, which encapsulates all of the creative work done above, because there were 3 realms, sea, sky, and earth. And so he recapitulates that right there. Over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. So virtually an exact repetition. Male and female, he created them. Binary, opposite numbers that will come together in chapter 2. God blessed them, and God said to them, notice the word God reappearing over and over and over again. Not even he. How many times should we say God right here? Curious. So there's that didn't work. If you're hiding the floating meeting controls, if you hit escape, they come back. This thing doesn't go away. Is there an X right there? There's no way to get rid of that. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in these 6 verses right here.
5 verses.
26 through 31?
Yeah. Sorry.
All right. So he blesses them and he gives them a mandate, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, subdue it. Number 1, fruitful and multiply, and number 2, subdue it. And the subdue it now is teased out a little bit. Rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So once again, he recapitulates all 3 realms of creation there. Seas, land, sky. And it is all given as dominion for the man and the woman. And you have in that then a complete repudiation of the very idea of idolatry. Period. You do not worship that which serves you. You do not worship that which you have dominion over. So I think that that's very deliberate. These people are surrounded, and we talked about this before, of course. These people are going to be, we're now in the desert probably, during the period after the Exodus. We haven't yet got to Canaan. And when they get to Canaan, they will be surrounded by people who worship everything around them. I mean, they do, when they don't have something around them to worship, they make something to worship. like Micah and his idol in Judges, where he hires the Levite to be the priest for his idol, whom his mother calls Yahweh, by the way. But that's their practice. They went in search. It's as if they were specifically designing their religious life to make a truth teller out of Paul. Let's see, in exchange, verse 23, exchange the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. So God gave them over. And they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than creator. The response in Genesis 1, that place from which Paul gets his grid, his vision for understanding this stuff, we see the man and the woman having been given dominion over all of those realms, giving them the foolhardiness to the idea of worship, of idolatry. In my mind, it's not even implied. It's when you understand the situation on the ground, you ask, why does he put a subdue here, rule over? My answer is to eliminate any justification, any rationale for the worship of what Paul calls four-footed animals and crawling creatures and so forth.
So then the children of Israel did this after the Exodus. This is later they got the book.
Yeah, so assume that Moses, the Christians are the only ones that believe this, by the way. They think the secular world believes that this book was written way later. That doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't work, but it doesn't matter. We just take it as a premise that if Moses wrote it, he wrote it between the Exodus or the giving of the law, let's say, and his death before they entered the land of Canaan.
Because they were coming out of Egypt.
Exactly. Yeah, they were surrounded on all sides by idol worship of physical phenomena, including sun, moon, and stars. The great god in Egyptian religion was Ra, the sun god. That gives you a sense of why there was the darkening of the sun, and the meaning of that would have had for the Egyptians when that sun went black in the name of Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. So, oh boy, that would have been a moment, a religious moment, a religious awakening on the part of the Egyptians. We got to get this God out of our territory, and the way we do that is we get his people out as well. And then when they get to Canaan, it will be Baal, B-A-A-L, who is the storm god, I think. And then just all kinds of gods.
There's a reason that they worship that which is created rather than the creator. And that reason is that a lot of that which is created can be manipulated to their wants.
Yes.
and their desires.
Yeah, it's a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours relationship where the god then depends on some of the gods fed, so they would feed them. And the gods would get hungry, and you would offer your women to the gods. You know, they procreated. You know, you had all these things come into play. Whatever vice, appetite, whatever you had among humans, that was what was projected onto their gods. But the point was, you know, if you want your crops to grow, you have to entice the gods to bless your crops. And so you engage in rituals, and by virtue of performing the ritual itself, you entice the god, seduce almost the god into the behavior that you want the god to manifest. There is no personal relationship there. It is simply by the ritual being performed itself. Not a lot of that in Christianity. You could say there's some that almost get there. That we're going to entice God into doing something by a behavior or by the way you say a prayer. or the way you say in the name of Jesus or something. And just by virtue of uttering the name, plus some other things, that he will sort of automatically do something. You got to watch that. So the response from God, the response from the psalmist is something like, our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he pleases. Case closed. That's the God of the Hebrews. That's a direct repudiation of idolatry right there in that statement. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth. Now he's speaking directly to the man and the woman. And every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to every living thing everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And that's a part of the creative process. And it was so. God said, let there be light. And there was light. God says something, and it was so. And here it is again. The mandate that the man and the woman have dominion over is now encompassed in that, and it was so. So this is a plant-eating world at this point. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. That's the first time he said that. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Awful lot happened on the sixth day. But you can see the concentric circles. You know, you have the creation of the heavens and the earth. Then light, you know, you're moving down. Then you get to land. Now you begin to populate the land with the animals. Now within that, or after that, you get to the humans. Not within that. After that, there's two entirely distinct. You know, it's the fundamental distinction. It's the sort of thing that evolutionary thinking cannot tolerate. Like I said last week, that there is any unbridgeable discontinuity between the animal world and the human world. We are simply an extension of the animal world in the next step. This repudiates that. No, the animals were created after their kind. And in contrast, the man and the woman were created in the image of God, after our likeness. He doesn't use the word kind, or whatever that Hebrew word is, but after our likeness. So there's your absolute stark distinction between humans and every other living, everything else he created. There is no genealogy between any animals, anything in creation, and the man and the woman. Their genealogy is, in some sense, God himself. And it's pretty clear at this point that the man and the woman now are going to hold center stage. And we will now move from humanity. You'll see the concentric circles form again. We'll move from humanity, and now it's going to continue to move down until we focus in on eventually Jacob and his 12 sons. And then that will become the story for the rest of the Bible. So we're going to meet Jacob in the 20s. I forget which chapter exactly. 29, 30, 31, I don't remember. Somebody can find it. But once we hit, well, actually we can go farther. Well, the story of the 12 patriarchs being born is its own brutal mess. But out of that story that will become the basis for the rest of the story of redemption, until eventually one comes from the tribe of Judah who will take the seat, take the throne of David. But everything after that is going to be the story of the unfolding drama, in some sense, of the history of Israel and the history of the redemption of the people of God. All right, we said we were going to put off any attempt to try to figure out. I'm not sure it's possible exactly what he means by image of God, but we can tease that out sometime.
25.
Jacob is born 25.
There's another vital difference between man and the rest of creation that sets him apart. And that is that man was created out of the dust of the earth, showing the worthlessness of man in his physical form, for what gave him worth, what gave him was the non-physical,
Right.
that which God breathed into him. And so I guess we can ask the question, was man really, look at the differences between the way everything else was created and
Yeah.
the way that man was created. Puts
It
us
is-
in a whole cat.
It is interesting that the man was formed out of the stuff of the earth. So, we'll talk about that, because she's talking about something that's coming up in chapter 2.
We'll get there.
But, let's see, man is gonna be formed out of the dust. Well, let's just wait. We'll get to it, and I don't have much more to say here. I had a thought on this, the similarity between God's, how is man like God? It's a dangerous conversation. Because in a little bit, he's the one who said right here, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. He said that. That's the blueprint for the man and his creation. Now go over a couple of chapters.
Uh-oh.
Verse 22, behold, the man has become like one of us. So after having created man after his likeness, I don't know what you want to call it, chastises the man for thinking at least this, that he is like us when he was created after God's likeness. So we'll talk about that when we get there as well. That's a tough thing to understand, exactly what's going on there.
Basically, serpent, so,
Yes, yes. Now
you can just like God, you don't feel it.
it's almost like that being created after God's own likeness is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's the basis for the absolute uniqueness of the humans in the world of creation, but it will also be that which sows the seed for man's fall. This belief that in that somehow man can attain to God, or I don't know what, we'll talk about it later, but it's a fascinating element to this. It's very understated, but it's there. It's part of the story. Consciously, self-consciously, I think. Anyway, the similarity, maybe that's a bad word, I wrote this a while back, between God and man is such that God could become man. Now I got to see if I still agree with this, without compromising his godhood or shortchanging his humanity. Jesus was fully God and fully man at the same time. Moreover, Jesus, as both man and God, was fully knowable by his disciples precisely because they were created in the image of God. Jesus was both Son of God and Son of David without any compromise. Only the Son of David could take the throne over the people of God. And the Son of David was going to be a human in order for him to be the Son of David, born of the lineage of Judah. But I find how this tension between man being created in the image of God and God becoming man, how that's woven together in the incarnation is the greatest. I don't care what anybody says. The incarnation was the greatest miracle ever. And most inscrutable. The one that most defies understanding. And this is precisely why. I have Hebrews 2. Now, let's not do that now. Let's continue. Got to get out of this chapter. Since man is created in the image of God, he can communicate with God and vice versa. And that's the next chapter. That's going to happen right quick. It is precisely because man is created in the image of God that God can be a personal God and not just a transcendent God who's distant. He's not just the God that his deists understand him, who wound up the clock of the universe and stepped out of it What he did was, in order to step into it, after he created it, he made one of his creatures in his own image, so that when he steps into it, there can be this relationship. Man is the first being described as being created male and female. So now we have this is a time when we do have, there's this big debate. There was this big debate in the 90s about gender inclusive language in Bible translations. The translation of anthropos, which is the Greek word for man, which you see all over the place in the New Testament. And when do you translate it human or man and woman or something like that? It's big rigmarole. And NIV translation board went through this where they had to decide, are we going to make this gender inclusive? Sometimes I agree with it, sometimes I don't. Just don't try too hard. It looks bad in retrospect because of what's happened with gender in our culture. They never could have anticipated that. But they were struggling with that gender inclusive language thing 30 years ago.
So the NIV nowadays, so they try to make God to be male or female, but it's not.
Where's that at? Can you get an example for that? So we can look at it?
Well, I don't, but First Baptist of St. John's used to use NIV as their main text. And they switched over because of the fact that the NIV was trying to make, change their concept of their language and their words to make God.
I would be surprised if were doing that. They did do the humans, the male and female with man, the application of the word anthropos, gender inclusive, but I've never remember them doing the same thing with God himself.
It's just been in recent years.
They were, okay, well, I'll look into that and see what I can.
Because I know Tim, that was pastor, and how they were changing.
It's possible that the NIV translation board got taken over. And they've taken over all kinds of other, Southern Baptist Convention,
So what's like in Hebrew and Greek, because in English, mankind refers to that, you include everybody, but there are specific female and male, so in the Greek, is there different words that do one versus the other?
Yeah, you have words for female and words for male. Words for man and woman are different words. But the universal word, it's all encapsulated in anthropos, man.
It's interesting to note that in both the Hebrew and the Greek, he or him, the male, is those words are dominant over the women, she and her. Let me give you an example. There can be 150 women in a gathering, and you can talk to those women as she and her, they and them. But you put one boy in there, through the language, it has to change. It has to be he, him.
I don't know any Hebrew, so.
Well, yeah. So it changes because of that one boy. The male is dominant in those languages.
Typically, it is thought in almost all ways that, especially in the ancient Near East, the women, it's just true. Women inherit their identity from the male, which is another reason that marriage is so important. If you're an unmarried female, you just don't have any societal identity, or it doesn't make sense. So they inherit through the male. And so that term man then would be inclusive. This idea that we're going to separate those out, and that's a modern sensibility. It's just the way that it is. God bless them, whatever that means. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. The animals were blessed in, verse 22. Go back and look at that for a second. God bless them, be fruitful and multiply and fill. So the blessing on the animals is a blessing of be fruitful and multiply and fill. The blessing on the man and woman is the same with an extension, subdue that which is filling the earth that I've already referenced. But nevertheless, I restate that this is anti-mythological. Not only is this not myth, it's anti-mythological, as I understand it. It's a repudiation of an Enuma Elish and these other creation accounts, and of the idolatry, the religious systems that surrounded the Hebrews, who have become the Israelites. 29. Behold, I have given you every green plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to every living thing that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. The plants have a purpose for existing. They're not just an accidental product of a blind process. They exist to provide food for the animals. All of the animals. They are food. Which is also a contrast to our modern day, where it's almost a part of the latent nature worship of our day, of our time, that, for example, the Amazon rainforest, it has a value in and of itself, independent of its utility. You know, that can then become take on an aura of sacredness, which then becomes virtually a veneration. And a lot of these people, they do think that way, specifically about that one, the rainforest. Not that I'm an advocate of destroying the rainforest. We have a responsibility, but the point here is the ecosystem, the universal ecosystem exists for a purpose. And that purpose is to provide food for the animals, essentially, according to this narrative. The animals are not in there for food, right? He's given every green plant for food. The animals are, so if you're going to make the argument from silence, it would be they've not been given a mandate to eat animals. That will be picked up again after the flood. That mandate will be changed and the argument from silence will go away. So as far as being, vegetarianism, no, we're way off. As far as vegetarianism being a superior way of life, sure, give that a try. I don't care. As a guy who eats an awful lot of fruits and vegetables, particularly now. And God saw that he made, and behold, it was very good, and there was evening, and there was morning, and the sixth day, and he rounds out the days. So day 6 corresponds to day 3. We talked about this, the parallelism of the story. On the 3rd day, we have land separated from water, and then on the 6th day, we finish out the carving out of the usefulness, the teleology, the purposefulness of the design to make it suitable for the habitation of humans. We're going to talk a little bit about, we all know what the word theology means, study of God or something like that, which for us usually, unfortunately, reduces down to doctrine, systematic theology, as if narrative is a different thing. I don't for a minute believe that. Our theology is fundamentally based in the narratives that we have, in the stories that we have, and how they're woven together. And then the story over the top of the stories that brings them all together. And then the doctrine comes out of that and a few other places, but as Greg, my friend in Washington, said, we have a narrative theology. And boy, is that true right here. Think about how much of our theology is based in this narrative. Right here, it's extraordinary. But we don't study narrative for its own sake. We study narrative. I mean, we got to know why these stories are here, what God is trying to communicate. And we tend not to be terribly, I wasn't all that interested in it myself until, I don't know, whenever I did Genesis the first time back in 2012 or so. But we all ought to be experts on narrative and what purpose they serve, the best of our ability and understanding, what purpose they serve in the plan of God, in the unfolding knowledge, the unfolding revelation of God himself. That's fundamentally what narrative is about and what he's doing. And that's exactly what the New Testament, the gospel writers, and Luke, the writer of Acts, was doing. Looking backward at narrative and all that it meant and all that happened. And Paul was doing it too in Romans so that we can understand the present. In our day, the present, or in their day, the present, the past was the key to understanding the present. You could not understand Jesus correctly, says Luke, Paul, etc., without understanding what came before. All of that happened so that we could understand even what a redeemer is, even the word redeemer or savior or something like that.
That's one of the main purposes of the Gospel of Matthew, the main phrase that's in Matthew, that it was fulfilled.
It was fulfilled.
And he takes us back to the Old Testament and shows us how that is tied in.
How many times does fulfilled appear in Matthew? Only 4?
Well, it's another word,
Yeah.
it's another phrase, but there's several phrases that say,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
look to the back.
I take your point. I'm surprised it's not more than that. Okay, so that's chapter 1.
In accordance
Yeah, it depends on the translation too.
And what your point was to, what's written in the past, Romans 15:4. For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the preaching and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's your teleology too. They're not just writing stories. I think I'll sit down today and write down how the universe was created. You know, and he writes, okay, that's good. I wrote down how the universe was created. I think I'll write down how the first sin happened, you know, as if that's just another thing that happened.
That's not how society thinks, because they make up their own to change it to what they want.
Yeah, and they even do that with this.
What I mean, so that's a human kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, this man, this stuff gets absolutely butchered. It just gets butchered all the time. There's so much self-interest that goes into how these passages are interpreted. That doesn't mean that anybody who disagrees with me is doing that. It just means, you know, there's lots of people who interpret this different that do so with a very humble sense that they're trying to know what it means. You know, but man, stuff just gets butchered.
But that's a human characteristic. You need that narrative, you need that story to come from.
You mean as far as our origins?
Yeah, everybody,
Yeah.
even the ones that are making it up into what they want. They have their backstory.
Yeah. Yeah, I've talked before, and I can talk again about, you know, in the Middle Ages, the pre-Enlightenment period, so the Enlightenment, let's just say prior to Descartes, the 1600s in Europe was a very religious, it was a religious society. And so I've said before that science was called natural theology. And that's the way these guys understood it, guys like Isaac Newton and so forth. And but the point was, they were all operating from the idea that there's one single authoritative narrative that explains the origin of things and the purpose of things, because it's the same thing. We live in a universe that is teleological, it's purposeful. It was designed for a purpose, and it's heading towards that purpose inevitably. That purpose is founded in in the Creator. So he will achieve his purposes through the universe, through the universe that he created. But anyway, so there was this single overarching authoritative narrative about the world and the God who was over it and how they related to how the one had to do related to the other. That got overthrown. In the Enlightenment, the idea of the idea that God is the center of all things, much like they thought the earth was the center of all things, the geocentric universe, gets overthrown. And just like you now have a heliocentric universe, did I get these terms right? Where the sun is the center, you no longer have, it's an ironic switch, God who is at the center, you have man who is at the center. Man is the measure of all things. And so that single overarching narrative is overthrown in favor of some kind of scientific narrative. And eventually, in Darwin's time, an evolutionary narrative of blind processes that produce blind, dispassionate, uncaring processes that eventually result in various forms of life. You can see how radically different those two narratives are. Single overarching religious narrative about the Creator to an evolutionary narrative about where life comes from the random selection of beneficial mutations, if that's not an oxymoron, then that gets overthrown. In our day and age, there are no narratives. There are no authoritative narratives. You are your group identity. And we decide your group identity. And if you don't obey the rules that we set forth for the group that we've assigned you to, you're a heretic, you're an outcast. In the case of blacks, you're an Uncle Tom or something like that.
Postmodernism.
Yeah, actually, I would call it one step further, postmodernism. Postmodernism subverted that. It became postmodernism is the pessimism that followed the optimism of the scientific age, the Enlightenment age, after world wars and the nuclear threat and all, millions of people and pollution and the industrial age. You go from optimism in science to boldly go where no man has gone before, as James T. Kirk says in the intro to Star Wars, to pessimism in science and progress and truth and morality and so forth. And everything then becomes subjective. And now what enters the fray then is the next step, which be, in my mind, beyond postmodernist thought, into the next step, which is, we now know, identity politics, group identity, and competing identity, what's the word? The power struggle that these different groups competing with one another over control and resources and so forth. That's the age that we live in now. Fracturing of society, fracturing of individual identity,
Of the family.
family, everything. Depression, alcoholism, drug use, homelessness, it's all the supremacy of the fracturing of everything of society and everything within it. Once you overthrow that single overarching authoritative narrative, religious narrative of, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it took us, let's call it 400 years, about 400 years or so to get there, but here we are. Where do we go from here? Nobody knows. Okay, I'll have to go back and listen and see if I still agree with next week with everything I just said. Think about how, I've said this before, for people born into that, Look, think about these kids whose mothers just, for whatever reason, want to be one of the ones who gets to brag on Twitter that they have a gender neutral or transgender child. Holy schmoly. That's unbelievable when you talk about fracturing, right at the very heart of it. There's this new phenomenon now of kids who had that done to them. I was watching a video of a girl who transitioned, as they say. That's the greatest euphemism of all time. Transition. But she transitioned, and when she was 12, and the mother's going to say, that was her decision. No, it wasn't her decision. You treated your daughter like a lab rat. You wanted to be able to brag on Twitter. You got one. First, yeah.
Isn't it interesting that we determine by society at this point that people are adults at the age of 18, and yet at the age of 12, they are making these life-changing decisions that stick.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Led into it by their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. And their friends, because they tend to surround themselves with their, but anyway,
It's so, you're so cool that you are
Yeah.
denying what you were born.
so this girl she's now 20 something. And
Is
she
it a
real,
girl?
it's yes, the female.
Oh, she transitioned into a female.
No.
He
Other way around. She's a female who transitioned.
into a male.
Yes,
And so can you say she at this point?
yes.
Is this the case?
Let's say she anyway.
All right,
No.
all right, just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify.
Was this the case where she transitioned back? or
Yeah. Yeah. And now she begins to realize what her mother did to her and the doctors. So now she's suing everybody. And that's coming. Class action lawsuits against these doctors and maybe even the parents. No, that won't be a class action, but class action lawsuits against parents, against doctors and maybe organizations and so forth. The British have done an about face on this stuff. They saw it coming. They've done an about face on this. They're not playing with this gender thing anymore, I don't think.
Who is it?
The British government, yeah. But that's what'll bring it down is personal liability, because the people who do this stuff, it's always the same old thing. You support policies that you have no stake in and that you think won't affect you. So the doctors do this stuff and they make the money off of it because this is no risk and they don't care. They just don't have a conscience. Until here comes the class action and suddenly there's a lawsuit on the works for $100 million against the American Medical Association or whatever number of doctors or something like that. And then all of a sudden it's, backtrack as much as they possibly can, but it's too late. Yeah, I say sue them until they are dead. And then sue their corpse. That's my feeling about these people. Because they don't have a conscience about it. Child abuse. Verse 1. That's my rant. There are two kinds of humans, male and female, and they are both immutable. So deal with it. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. I didn't even notice that word was used right there. Completed. Complete instead of created. And all their hosts. By the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done. He rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had done. And God blessed the seventh day. So in 22, he blesses the animals. Then later he blesses the humans. And now he blesses the seventh day. Sanctified it, consecrated it, separated it apart, made it holy, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven. And we'll talk about the debate about, is that a Is that a concluding statement on what preceded, or is that an intro statement on what's coming? And I think it's,
Well,
I think it's probably a bit of both, yeah. But next week, we're gonna talk about the Sabbath. You don't get out of chapter 1 without everything in a sense. I mean, everything is pushing towards the humans. And then the text takes the next step, anticipating the what do you want to call it? The religious system that will be handed down to the humans to obey. And the basis for that religious system will be the Sabbath. The religious covenant, the covenant that God will make with Moses, is anticipated in this chapter right here. Which makes sense, since, in my view, the man who wrote this is the man who went up the mountain and got the covenant, got the law from God, and sprinkled the blood of the covenant. But this is where we're at now. So we'll go ahead and stop. It's 10:15, but we did get out of chapter 1, so that's that's progress, yeah. I got to rant about something. We'll know we're making progress on that issue, the gender issue, when you can't say it from the public, from the front of the room without getting laughed at. Like these journalists and stuff like that, because there's no consequence for them. They just say, they just say this stuff. I don't know what they're saying about the Trump shooting right now. Probably being a little careful.
I've heard so far that it was a setup by Trump.
Yeah, well, but there was another guy killed.
Oh, two of them.
Well, I thought one was the shooter and one was an innocent bystander. But I could be wrong about that. Anyway, that's going to dampen any enthusiasm with regard to the shooting. Not to mention the fact that well, now we're into politics, so I got to stop the thread. Sorry, I shouldn't do that. I let that bleed over. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end it. Nate, you still out there?
Yes,
Did you enjoy that one, or minus my little political beginnings of a political statement?
it's
Okay.
interesting, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Okay, well, thanks for showing up. I'll hopefully see you next week.
Okay,
Take care.
yep, thank you, you too.